Welcome to our workshop on the principles you can use to reduce extraneous overload. My name is Kim and I thank you for joining me. Today we will discuss 3 different principles to help you meet this goal. So let's begin with a quick review of exactly what extraneous overload is. Extraneous overload occurs when essential processing and the extraneous processing, this is referenced from the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, is greater than the cognitive capacity of the learner. And this is according to Mayer and Varela, 2014. If you were referencing the cognitive load theory of Poss and Sweller, 2014, then the extraneous overload would occur when the intrinsic cognitive load and the extraneous cognitive load exceeds the working memory of the learner. This overload needs to be reduced. There are numerous principles that can aid in minimizing such overload. In this video, I will focus on the principles of signaling, spatial contiguity, and coherence. For each principle, I will define it, then explain its relationship to the cognitive load theory, followed by a demonstration of how to use this principle in your own course instruction. So let's begin with the coherence principle. This states that individuals learn more deeply from a multimedia message when the extraneous material is excluded. Now, how does this principle relate to the cognitive load theory? When a multimedia message contains learning material, i.e. the intrinsic cognitive load, but is presented in a difficult manner, the extraneous cognitive load, this leads to extraneous overload. Extraneous cognitive load could be caused by things such as the font size being too small, colors on the screen are hard to read, the image is blurry, there's a glare across the screen, and these are just some to mention. This will lead to the demands of the intrinsic load and the extraneous load being greater than the processing capabilities of the working memory of the learner. We already know that the working memory is already limited, so therefore the extraneous load requires processing and pulls these resources away from the processing of the intrinsic load, i.e. the learning material. This often results in a lack of meaningful learning. Schemas are not formed or expanded, and nothing enters into permanent storage, i.e. the long-term memory. So then how do we actually do this? So on the screen here, what you're actually seeing is this would be a violation of the coherence principle. The font is hard to read. There's many pictures that may or may not have something to do with the topic. Yet these pictures and even the small font is requiring us to process or to use processing resources to scan, to make sense of things. So we are actually then bending many resources to process the extraneous cognitive loads as well as the intrinsic cognitive loads, and this is not going to lead to meaningful learning. So how can we fix this? So here's an example of pretty much the same slide redone. You could see how we've eliminated extraneous cognitive load by getting rid of the unnecessary images, by making the font size readable and clear, and actually by formatting it in a more structured and organized way. This would then allow us to have sufficient resources to process the intrinsic cognitive load, because once again we've eliminated or minimized that extraneous cognitive load, and this should lead to meaningful learning. Another principle is signaling. This is when individuals will learn more intensely from multimedia messages when either cues such as arrows or underlines showcase the necessary information or knowledge that the learner will need to focus on. So if you could see from the example here, we have a map of the US with an arrow pointing to New York State. Obviously, I'm trying to focus the learner's attention here on New York State. The signaling principle relates to cognitive load theory because what it does is it directs the learner's attention to those essential or relevant information that they need. This should decrease the extraneous load, so therefore it helps the working memory by providing the opportunity to identify what is important information and This will then continue the integration process with the schemas as well as the long-term memory. So a demonstration of the signaling principle is found on your screen here. So we have the first paragraph about recruitment. And you can read it for yourself. There's several different lines. And then we have the second paragraph, same thing as the first, but using signaling. Here we've just used the use of bolding some words and underlining so we can draw the attention that this is the important facts in this particular paragraph. The last principle is spatial contiguity. And this states that individuals learn more deeply when words and pictures are near each other on the screen or on the page. So what we're seeing here is we have a map of the world and we have arrows and then the names of the countries right next door. We don't have them kind of off to the left or the right, but we've integrated it with the actual picture that we are using. Now, how does this principle relate to cognitive load theory? Once again, it's going to direct the information or the relevant information or the essential information to the learner, but in one place. So this should decrease the extraneous cognitive load because we don't have to scan back and forth across pages or spaces looking for the relationship between the words and the pictures. This is done very concisely for us. This makes the processing resources directed towards the essential material or the intrinsic load and results in the working memory doing its job and thus leading to meaningful learning results. So here's a demonstration of this particular principle. You can see here that the pictures, i.e. the boxes, and the words are closely in proximity in terms of the symbols, same thing. So it makes it very easy to scan and retain the essential information. The extraneous cognitive load has been reduced, and hopefully this will lead to meaningful learning taking place. Meaningful learning will result since the working memory can identify what is the important information and begin the organizing and integration with the schemas and the long-term memory. So here are the references that were used today throughout this video. And lastly, I just want to thank you for joining me. I hope that you have learned some important tips to consider when designing your own courses in regards to how to reduce extraneous overload. Thank you again for joining me.